Is A Nightmare Before Christmas a Halloween movie or a Christmas movie? Let's discuss. Hi, hello, how's it going? It's Lo. I am feeling this look today. This is one of my favorite work shirts. I wear this to work. One of the things that I miss the most about the office is that I just have a whole wardrobe full of office clothes that I absolutely love, and I just don't wear them anymore because I work in my pajamas. So, as per my last video, you are all well aware that I am in fact going to do a wrap-up of the whole year. The best, the worst, the ugly. My latest video was talking about the worst books that I read in 2020. Apparently this is a hot topic right now, which is... But today we're actually going to be spreading positivity and love and talking about the most impactful, my favorite, the best books that I read in 2020. I just want to make a quick disclaimer that while I may say that a book is my favorite and that I really liked a book, there are like categories of good books that I read. I might give a book 5 stars because it was a thoroughly enjoying read, but that doesn't necessarily stick with me after a while. Like, I just carry on my day-to-day life and it's a good book and I appreciated it, but it's not something that I would just like keep thinking about. This year actually gave me tons of books that I just keep going back to and thinking about and just absolutely falling in love again and again. Like, those are the books that I will carry with me, and books that I'm like, okay, this is something else. This has improved me as a human. I'm gonna talk about those books today. So this is not only the 5 stars of this year, because if you go to my Goodreads, there's a ton of books that I gave 5 stars that I'm not necessarily going to talk about in this video, but it's just the books that I read and I'm like, this changed me. Which I really think, like, a really good book might not even be perfect, like structure-wise, but it changes you profoundly in some way. And, you know, maybe it will change you guys too. So let's hop into it. I'm gonna go chronologically again and begin from when I actually started tracking the books that I started reading up to the end of the year, the books that really caused an impact on me. So the first book that I read that was really impactful for me this year was this one. This is White Chrysanthemum by Lynn Bracht. This was a book that I got from a monthly subscription service, and as always, the cover is just fucking beautiful. So in White Chrysanthemum, you are following 2 sisters, Henna and Emmy, in different points in their life. When we are following Henna, she is living through the Japanese occupation of Korea, and while we're following Emmy, we're kind of following like her later part of her life, like in the late 2000s, as she has children and she's kind of like dealing with what happened to Henna and to herself throughout the story. So basically the story begins when Henna is accompanying her mother, and her mother is a Hanyo. Might be butchering this pronunciation. I am sorry for any Korean speakers who might be listening to me. I apologize. Hanyo basically are deep sea divers and deep sea fishers, and these are women who, you know, go deep into the sea, holding their breaths almost for like 3 minutes at times, and they hand fish like crabs and shellfish and small fishes that they can then bring to the surface and sell. And in the island of Jeju, where this first part of the story is set, is basically like the majority of the income of the island comes from the Hanyo women doing this work that is passed on through generations, like from mother to daughter to granddaughter and so forth. In the beginning of the book, Henna is actually accompanying her mother, who is a Hanyo. She's learning the craft from her mother and she's very passionate about it. Like, she loves the sea, she loves swimming, and it's definitely where she feels at home. Then she is kidnapped by the Japanese Imperial Army and she is sent to Manchuria to serve as a comfort woman. This already sets you up for some pretty hard stuff, but wait, it gets worse. In the future, we're actually following Emmy after, you know, she had to grow in a house where her sister was abducted by the Japanese Imperial Army. She had no idea what happened to her sister. As she grew older, some women managed to come back and then told the stories of what would happen to those women who were used as comfort women. She just had to keep like imagining her sister going through that. Also, she was going through the political tensions before the division of Koreas and then she had to go through the Korean War and everything that happened to her at that point. So Emmy is just trying to make sense of it all, while Henna is just trying to survive it all. And it's a very beautiful parallel between the two sisters, because one is just trying to survive and the other one is trying to comprehend what was that, and doing that effort and that exercise that shows like the depth of the cruelty that comfort women were subjected to, that were not only centered around the experience of those women, but actually spread throughout the community. And you feel the ripples of hurt and pain throughout the community. This book murdered me. This book murdered me because, as you all know, I have a younger sister. Throughout the story, Henna was going through the worst things, like the absolute worst things. And the thought that kept her sane and safe was, I am doing this so my sister is safe. And it was so profoundly like moving for me and touching for me, because as an older sister I would do the same thing. So there was an instant connection to this woman who found solace in remembering the sea, as the sea reminded her of the place that she came from. And on the flip side, there was Emmy trying to wrap her head around the senseless violence and how much of her she had to give away. And there's this one important part that she really mentions, that the problem is not only necessarily war, because she thought that the suffering would end when the Japanese left and then started the infighting. And then the conclusion that she arrives is that it doesn't matter who is wielding the gun, war is always terrible for everyone who just stays around it, which is the theme of the books that I'm reading lately for reasons unknown. But White Chrysanthemum was absolutely beautiful. It's a beautiful study on the relationships of kinship and on the relationships of, you know, just this deep love that exists between sisters, and they are like, I will do anything to keep you safe, even if that means me going through the worst things imaginable. One thing that I could say about this book that I kind of didn't really like about it was the villain of the story, the man who kidnapped Henna. I thought that he was a bit cartoonish for me, and it was just like, you know, there's a certain point in the book where the author kind of gives him a little bit of backstory that his wife and child died, and, you know, you're kind of like, I guess, but I also don't fucking care about you. The point of the story is not necessarily to show the evilness of this particular person, and this is why I just gave it a pass, because the larger story was to show how often enough in situations of conflict women are handed the short end of the stick, and B, how senseless the violence that happens in a war is, and how, you know, this is always something that people will carry with them to the grave. And most of the times they don't have the recognition, the apology, and the reparations that they deserve, which was the case with the comfort women. I think about this book a whole lot. I just love this book a lot. And I gave it like 4.5 out of 5 stars. Because I was a bit iffed about the villain, it really threw me off a little bit. But overall, this is a book that really just flipped my world upside down. I cried until 5 a.m. and I hugged my sister and I was like, I would die for you. And my sister is like, please get the fuck away from me. So, you know, true sisterly relationship. The next incredible book that I read in the year of 2020 was this one. And this again is another book for my monthly subscription service, and the cover is once again absolutely fucking stunning. It's just so simple but so beautiful. And this is Erotic Stories for Punjabi Widows by Balli, Kaur, Jaswal. In this book we follow a girl named Nikki, and she just dropped out of law school. She's trying to, you know, she's stalling to tell her parents that she actually dropped out of law school, and in the meantime her dad dies. And, you know, since her family is in a very weird financial position, she just kind of has to find something to support herself with, because her dad isn't there to kind of hold everything together anymore. So one day she's running an errand for her sister in a Sikh temple in London, and she sees this ad about creative writing lessons for women in the temple. She applies, gets the job, and when she gets there, she finds out that the women are there just to learn English. But she was like, maybe we should try writing something, and then the widows write a bunch of smut. And it's really fucking good. It's so fucking good. There's something about listening to 80-year-old grannies just talking about dicks that is just, it's just so fucking good. It's just, it was one of the best reads that I had. I was cringing, but I was laughing, and I was cringing. I was, oh my god, I could never listen to my grandma say something like this. Because all of those women are widows, and because the community is so tight-knit, they all know each other. And she's like, this woman is kind of like my grandma. Why is she talking about someone else's dick? But, you know, that premise in itself would be very lighthearted and fun, and it really was. It was so funny. But what's really underlying in this is, you know, the relationship of women with other women and how women actually are treated and mistreated inside very traditional marriages, but also how they can find a lot of joy in that. So in between the lines of these stories, while they were telling like these erotic stories, the women were also telling the stories of their weddings and, you know, how they hated their husbands, or they, you know, thought they would hate their husbands, but they absolutely loved them by the end of their lives, even though the marriage was arranged. So it was a very interesting array of women who just came together and just kind of like wanted to talk about something that is not often talked. That is this kind of like old women just really opening themselves up as humans, you know, humans who have sexual desires, because they clearly do, but also humans who love and suffer and who carry a lot of grief. But on the end of the day, these women are women who have great hearts, and they are just chilling, and they are just, you know, wanting to talk about dicks too, and, you know, they are just have this immense amount of knowledge to offer to other women, which is a lesson that Nikki kind of learns, because she goes into this with kind of like this white feminist perspective. We're going like, I am going to liberate and empower all of these women, but she actually learned more from them, like how to see those women as more than just the oppressed widows of Punjabi origin. No, she just sees them as full-fledged people, and it was so beautiful, but also it was so fucking funny. These widows are so fucking nasty. I love them for it. But yeah, I give this book 4.5 out of 5 stars. There were a little bit of things with the book that I kind of didn't like. One of which, like the majority of which, was kind of like the ending. It was a bit weird, but overall, this was just a great reading experience. And it really got me to think, you know, how we approach older women with our feminism, and how we can create kind of like this environment of sisterhood and sorority, even with older women who we might think might be beyond, you know, all of our feminist progressive stuff. But the next book that I read that I absolutely adored in 2020 was The Bear and the Nightingale by Katherine Arden. I think it's kind of like one of BookTube's sweethearts too. This follows this young girl called Vazia as she lives in the middle-aged Russia, and she is the only one in the house who can see the household spirits, and she communicates with them and etc. And then a priest comes into town, and that priest just kind of like turns everyone in this town against her, and she's trying to get the spirit strong for the winter, because she has a very strong inkling that something really bad is going to happen during winter. No one kind of really listens to her, so a bunch of weird shit happens. Also, there's the god of death, and oh god. I just love The Bear and the Nightingale. First things first, because of the research that Katherine Arden put into writing this book. It was meticulous. Like, Katherine Arden had a degree in Russian history and Russian language, so she knows, like, she like ate that history book up, and she could really paint this medieval pre-unified Russia times really well, and to kind of weave magic into that, like the amount of research and effort that must have gone into that to really understand like the beliefs of people at the time, and understand like the place and the history that had, and to really create this world where you have this girl, and to talk about things that resonate to this day in modern times. Like Vazia wanted more than just marry, have children, or go to a convent and just spend the rest of her days there. She wanted more. She wanted the world. She wanted to see everything and live everything. And at the time, that got her branded as a witch. So it was interesting how she could put very modern things into a very medieval setting without taking away the medievalness of it, but also making sure that we understand this message of that women who went against the grain just were scorned in all times, all places, always, and that we must learn from those witches, you know, who escaped the pyre, just how important it is to follow your truth. I will say that the beginning of the book's a bit slow though, and on the later installments of the series I have a couple of issues with it, but The Bear and the Nightingale is just the most atmospherical, whimsical, dark but still amazing read. The power this woman holds, oh my god, Vazia is amazing and The Bear and the Nightingale is absolutely great. So it's one of the books that I most highly recommend to everyone who's like, I want a fantasy that isn't like YA, it's like, I just want a fantasy that is just like, I got lost for words, okay? And that doesn't happen often, so yeah. The next amazing book that I read in 2020 was 1,000 Splendid Suns by Khaled Hosseini. Oh god, this book murdered me. This book murdered me. I was like, I'm gonna read 1,000 Splendid Suns, how bad can it be? You know, I've done the Kite Runner. How bad can 1,000 Splendid Suns be? Way worse. So basically 1,000 Splendid Suns is a story about Mariam and Layla. Women who are united by a very abusive husband and by terrible circumstances of a war. But it's also about Kabul in Afghanistan and how war and conflict just destroyed a place that was once so filled with so beautiful things, such beautiful things. And not only that, but how the war actually wrecked lives that were so promising in the future, that had such promise. And just like how the senseless and the baseless violence of it just actually pushed people to do their absolute worst. But also how women were treated like shit under Taliban rule. And also just like how women born out of wedlock were just handled like the worst hand ever. And just like in a study on how women suffer. And that's it, not tied to the religion, it's not tied to the place, it's just tied to the human condition of being the ones that will be able, generally speaking, to carry children and how that impacts their entire lives. And it's just so fucking mind-blowing. And it's just like, this book fucking wrecked me. I would cry every single page. And he would describe Kabul and I would be like, this city's going to fucking explode. And I was right. And I grew attached to the characters. And then there were literal children being bombed. And I was like, what is going on with this book? It's just like, it was a shit show all around. And I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars. The reason why I think that 1,000 Splendid Suns, it's so good. And I think that it's even better than The Kite Runner is because it really shows like how war can really destroy someone's life, not only because war, but also because sometimes war takes away people's will to do anything else, and the oppressiveness and the difficulties of certain parts of war and certain parts of living just makes it so that it's just, you know, people lose the will to live and to fight and to resist, and you kind of understand why, because once you've been dealt a shitty hand your entire life, you just kind of go with it because you're too tired. And you know, being given the smallest bit of affection and the smallest bit of understanding can really change someone's life. All of this rambling makes absolutely zero fucking sense, but this book is just like, what the fuck? This book is just one of the, it's just, oh god. I don't have any coherent thoughts anymore about this. Read 1,000 Splendid Suns and cry about it with me in the comments. I just have nothing else to say. Yeah. The next amazing book that I read in 2020 was The Henna Wars by Adiba Jaigirdar. I talked about this book in, I think it was my July or June wrap-up, something of the sort. In the Henna Wars, you're following Nishat, who is the daughter of immigrants, who is an immigrant herself, and from Bangladesh, and she just recently came out to her family as a lesbian. Her family is taking its time, kind of wrapping their heads about it, and Nishat is just like in this very weird place where she doesn't really feel at home with anything, and the school that she attends decides to set kind of like a business competition for the kids. And Nishat, being Bengali, she's like, I'm going to create a henna business. And then another girl in class says like, I too am going to create a henna business. And just like, they're going to war, and that's why it's the Henna Wars. The Henna Wars, it's a very feel-good book, and it's a very lovely, lovey-dovey, just sweet, overall amazing book. Specifically, it's a very good book for young lesbians and young sapphics who are just like want to make sure that it is possible to overcome initial difficulties with their families. I've sent this book to so many lesbian friends. All of them cried because it was so soft and so sweet and so gentle, and you know, the discussions were really important. But the reason why I really carried this book with me, as I said in my wrap-up, was because Adiba Jaigirdar, while not being Brazilian, nailed a part of Brazilian existence that is very dear and near to my heart, because the girl that runs the opposite business to Nishat is Flavia, and Flavia is Brazilian. There's a moment where Nishat and Flavia are kind of talking about, you know, why didn't Flavia come out as bi? And Flavia is like, look, people already think that they can do whatever the fuck they want with my body because I'm Brazilian. If I was bisexual and if I was Brazilian, I would never hear the end of it. And that is so true. And as a bisexual Brazilian woman, I feel that really deeply, because the over-sexualization of Latinas in general, but Brazilians in specific, it's so incredibly harmful, because it really like reduces my use to and my nationality and my culture that is incredibly amazing and that is so rich and has so much to offer, to the fact that the women that were born here are so closely associated with being sex objects. The fact that Adiba Jaigirdar was able to put this in a book shows that she had the care to talk to people who had different experiences from her, really listen and try to incorporate that into the characters. It shows to me that she was not lazy with her writing. As we all know, lazy writing is what pisses me the fuck off in all of the bad books that I've read in 2020. Adiba Jaigirdar did beyond just Googling some basic Brazilian words and just going with it, Googling some basic Brazilian stuff and just going with it. She really took the time to talk with Brazilian women and to really understand, you know, the struggles that Brazilian women go through, and to add that to a book to make sure that the character of a different culture that she's writing about is well represented, and not only well represented, but isn't offensive, and it's kind of like showcases the difficulties that people of a certain culture, of a certain nationality will face. And I was so incredibly grateful for her, because even though this book wasn't meant as representation for me, it represented me so well. I know that other people with different backgrounds will talk about the Henna Wars and the significance of this book in other contexts, and you know, they're incredibly valid, and I think that Muslim lesbian girls and Muslim sapphics as a whole will feel incredibly represented by the Henna Wars. But the reason why this book spoke to me is because someone, somewhere, sometime took the time to listen to my Brazilian sisters, listen to their troubles, and to really commit to make sure that people will listen to them too. And that is incredibly beautiful. I think we should all take lessons from Adiba Jaigirdar when it comes to writing cultures that are different than ours, because it's not that you can't write them. It's just like you need to have this nuance and talk to people who really know what's going on and how difficult or not things are. So I give the Henna Wars 5 out of 5 stars. I just cried a lot, and I cried on camera, and I just cry, and every time I remember this book I cry again. So you know, just read the Henna Wars. What are you missing? Just read the Henna Wars, please. The next amazing book that I read in 2020 was The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo. This book was amazing. It was the first time that I read a novel written in verse, and I loved it. I listened to the Poet X on audiobook, and it was an amazing experience because Elizabeth Acevedo narrates it herself, so she knows the flow and the cadence of the words. I strongly suggest you give the audiobook a try. It was so worth it for me. Basically, in the Poet X, you're following this young girl called Xiomara, and Xiomara is the daughter of Dominican immigrants to the US. She lives in New York. Her mother is a very staunch Catholic, and she's just trying to figure it out herself. Like, I don't want to do this confirmation thing. I don't want to do this. So she then finds in the poetry club of her school like a way out for all this mess and confusion that she was feeling and all this doubt that she was feeling, and this kind of like becomes a point of contentiousness between her and her mother. And now going into the things about this book that I loved, there's a lot about this family too, like her relationship with her father, and there's a part that she talks like, how do you call absent a father who lives with you but is never there for you? Something of that sort. Her relationship with her brother is also amazing. You know, the difficulties that they both face, kind of like not living up to the standards of their parents, you know, the standards that their parents hold her to, because she's a woman, so she needs to take care of the house and she needs to do the chores and she needs to do all of that. But deep down, what really drew me to the Poet X is Xiomara's relationship with her mother. It's not that her mother is just a bitch. It's so much more complex than that. It's just like trying to get away from a person that you love, and a person that you love doing things that are harmful for you because they think that this is the best that they can do for you. And just kind of understanding where her mother is coming from, where that pain, that hurt, that regret is coming from, and just trying to wrap her head around all of that, and just being like, okay, but that is not my weight to carry. Some people were trying to pitch the book for me, were like, oh, Xiomara's mother is kind of like a bitch, so she's trying to struggle against this very conservative religious mother. And the truth is, and the reality is, it's so much more than that. It's like the depth of her love and her need to get away of a conception of life that doesn't suit her, a conception of life that doesn't fit her, and she wants to escape that. And it's very similar to my relationship with my mom, even though I'm 24 years old now, and you know, my mom and I just really get along amazingly. But when I was a teenager, I too had a lot of issues with my mom, especially because I was doing political activism, and my mom was raised during the military dictatorship, so she was dead afraid of me doing political activism, me attending protests. So, but we really had this kind of like push and pull together, because what she wanted for me and what she wanted me to do was not what I wanted to do. So it just kind of had that. And as you grow older, it's kind of like there are certain things that you kind of understand where your mother is coming from. Well, okay, I guess protests in Brazil are just like routinely very brutal. It's like tear gas and pepper spray and rubber bullets, and just sometimes real bullets too, just for the heck of it. I know that this is a very dangerous situation, but on the other side is like, I am old enough now that like if I want to put myself into this danger because I think that it is important, she cannot say much about it, so I just kind of have more control over my life. As you grow older, you kind of grow out of a bit of this conflict. It was just so interesting to see a different situation, a different but also bring me back to this exact moment and feeling of being a teenager at odds with your mother, trying to be someone else than your mother, but also loving your mother so deeply, so profoundly, so viscerally. And I think this is one of the most beautiful aspects of the Poet X. Those two women are just trying to navigate around each other and just trying to navigate their expectations of one another too. As you grow older, you learn not to expect that much from your parents, because you know they're humans and they have their feelings. Xiomara coming to terms with that too was just beautiful. It was just amazing. The Poet X was an amazing read. I cried like a fucking baby, and it was just so beautiful. It was amazing. Also, Elizabeth Acevedo's poetry is like amazing. Elizabeth Acevedo, conte comigo para tudo. Você quer o mundo, eu te dou. Você quer o mundo, eu te dou. The next amazing book that I read in 2020 was The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. Everybody knows the Poppy War. Everybody knows the Poppy War, okay? It's like everybody knows. Must I say anything? Did I jump on the Poppy War bandwagon? Yes, I did. Did I have the courage to read The Dragon Republic and The Burning God? No, I did not. Will I ever have it? I'm not sure. Basically, in the Poppy War, you're following this girl called Rin, and she is, she passes an exam, and she goes to this very high-ranked military school called Synagogue to be a military officer. But Rin is very dark-skinned, and she comes from a very poor background, and most, if not all, of her classmates are very rich, and the sons and daughters of very important people. And Rin is kind of doing that. But as she's trying to deal with that universe, shit goes down, and then she's kind of like forced to face war, actual war, and not just, you know, the idea of it in her school. The Poppy War is based on real events and the occupation of the Japanese Empire on China. It does not shy away from anything, so it is a very gritty, brutal read. But the Poppy War, for me, was incredibly interesting for two reasons. And the first one is that Rin is not a fucking hero. I don't know why people are like, R.F. Kuang is like glamorizing war because she's telling this point of view of Rin as a hero. Rin is not a hero. She's not even an anti-hero. She's just like the result of what happens when you put systematic poverty, and you push people into poverty, when you push people into dangerous situations, when you push people into loneliness, when you push people into desperation. She is what happens when, you know, the only thing that keeps you going is the thought of revenge because you have been wronged. Like, you cannot blame a person who has seen and lived what Rin has seen and lived and not think like, but she had to be the better person. No. And none of these characters are the better person, and they do very fucked up shit, like, all the time. Which leads to my second point. The Poppy War, once again, is the Poppy War, not the Poppy fucking stroll through the park. It is not like, I don't know, like all of the YA protagonists, maybe Katniss Everdeen aside, who are like, I am going to fight against the corrupt government, and they're just like all perfect and nothing ever really bad happens to them. Rin goes through the fucking grinder, and all of them do, and it's like, you see how people who are too young, too unprepared, even though they had been studying in a synagogue, they're young, unprepared, just not ready emotionally, and none of them, even the oldest amongst them, aren't. Because war is never something that you can prepare yourself for, and it's gritty, and it's ugly, and it makes you make awful decisions, and it makes you become the worst version of yourself, and Rin just does that, you know. And, you know, the phoenix as a metaphor for revenge and anger is just incredibly perfect, because all the time people are like, don't give in to this. Don't give in to this, because this will make you miserable. And she's like, but this is the only thing carrying me forward. This is the only reason why I need to fight. I have to fight, because if I don't do that, I'm just going to be swallowed by my despair, because no one can see what I've seen and live through what I've lived and come out of it unscathed, and come out of it with their head into place and just being like, oh, kumbaya and whatever. This is not about it. So the Poppy War is one of the most realistic depictions of war. And sometimes war is like in the Poppy War, when you're forced to see, witness, and experience the most hideous of experiences that humans can do with one another, because humans are capable of so much evil. And I think this is the point that the Poppy War shows. It was one of my absolute favorite books. I just kept like, I read the Poppy War and I spent 3 days. I just kept thinking about it, and I just kept mulling over the words and trying to wrap my head around all of that. So, man, the Poppy War, 5 stars. In 2021, I promise to try to find that courage within me to finish the trilogy, but let's see. The last amazing book that I read in 2020 was, surprising absolutely no one, this one. This is 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Probably my favorite book of all year. This book, I have no words about this. It's just, basically in 100 Years of Solitude, you're following like several generations of the same family called Buendia in a city called Macondo. This is classical Latin American magical realism. A lot of weird shit happens and you're like, what's that? It's Macondo. But the point is that the people in this book, and I'll say this once again, keep forgetting one another. And they keep repeating names, and when they repeat names, they repeat the same mistakes. and they just keep forgetting one another and just keep forgetting one another. They just keep forgetting that they even existed at one point because, and as this book says, the lineages condemned to 100 years of solitude will not have a second chance upon this earth. And this is like the purest expression of Latin American living. Because we're so forgetful, and because we're forced into forgetfulness, the worst of atrocities will happen to us, and no one really will remember to tell. So it's like it never happened, so you know, it's fine. If we were to remember everything that we withstood as a continent, we would not be able to survive. This book really spoke to me as a Latin American. This is one of my absolute favorite books of all times. The impact that this book had on me cannot be measured. The impact that it had, like everyone that I talked to, my friends was like, dude, you have to read 100 Years of Solitude. And everyone was just like, dude, I did not imagine that this book will get this thing about history, remembrance, and heritage so well. Also, there's this one part in this book where Colonel Aureliano Buendia says like, well, look what the fuck, the mess that we got ourselves in just because we invited a gringo to eat bananas. And it's like, it's so very gringo that you offer the gringo a hand and then he takes your entire torso. So, you know, the humor in this is spot on, but, you know, the whole mythology of it and the whole whimsical nature of it, but also this, like this incredibly central argument that the forgetfulness of Latin America is by design, because if we were to remember what had happened to us, we would not be able to be bled dry as we are. I mean, read 100 Years of Solitude. Fuck Isabel Ibanez. This book is what you need to do when you're talking about Latin American politics. Like, oh god. Finally, the last amazing book that I read in 2020 was The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. In The Only Good Indians, we're following 4 men from the Native American tribe of the Blackfeet. And as they go on a hunt on a day, and they end up hunting an elk, but they kind of waste all of that elk, so 10 years later, the elk is back and just after their asses. Surprising no one. But the reason why this book stuck with me was because the point of The Only Good Indians is this entire dynamic of this loving something that made you. It's the reason why you're here, and you know, it's your whole entire worldview. But at the same time, that being something that brings you so much grief and so much pain, and how you go about this, the ways in which you try to escape that legacy and that legacy keeps chasing after you, and how, you know, you try not to spread that legacy to your children, and that legacy will follow them regardless. So it's just a beautiful study in how, you know, colonization and native genocide and native violence and violence against natives just really turns something that is so central to one's identity into something that also is so integral to the pain that they experience. And this book was told so beautifully. Like, the writing of it is amazing. Stephen Graham Jones is an amazing writer. The way that he lays out the pieces that come together in the end, and the way that you're like, you kind of understand how things work the way that they do. This is a horror book, okay? I read this for Halloween, and I finished the book not scared. I finished the book in tears. And I just felt like my chest caving in with the grief that I felt reading The Only Good Indians, because it was just like so profoundly sad. The depth of the pain and the grief that is not only about losing individual people, but losing parts of your own culture, and then, you know, consequently one's self, and hating that and loving that and just being chased by that, being unable to escape what you are. It's just the beauty of it. It's just so fucking good. I strongly suggest The Only Good Indians for everyone who wants to go first away from white written horror, which is, you know, what the majority of horror is. It's horror written for the white perspective, but at the same time looking for something that will just like knock your wind out, because I was tense the entire story. I nearly broke my retainer while reading this. I was just like clenching my teeth so hard in tension that I could feel my retainer kind of twisting out of place. So I just had to stop. So like, this book is mind-blowingly good. Like, it's one of the best things that I've read this year. And it just really got me thinking about what we do with this heritage that we carry, and what we do when this heritage that we carry is also a heritage of pain and loss. So amazing. Anyways, these were my best reads of the year of 2020. If you read any of those, I want to know your opinions about them below. If any of them sound interesting, I also want to hear your thoughts about it below. Here's to 2021 with more amazing books that changed my life and more shitty books that will give me that sweet, sweet content to get those sweet, sweet views. I hope you guys have a nice day, and I'll see you guys next time.